everybody, I'm Lori Rudeman. Welcome back to Empower HR. We've had a really full and interesting day today, and right now here in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I'm based, it's 85 and sunny, and I'm looking out at my cul-de-sac and there are children playing out there, and I was just sharing that I wholly expect the ice cream truck to roll on by at any given moment. So that's what I'm looking at right now. I wonder what's happening in your neck of the woods. So feel free to drop a comment, be fun, be chatty in that attendee chat. That's what this is all about. If you see something you want to remark on, you want to make a joke, you think somebody could say something differently, whatever it is, we would love to hear from you. And it keeps the session interactive and fun and also personable, which is what we're trying to do today when we talk about these really important issues around empowering HR to make work better. I am so excited about this upcoming session because this is really where the rubber meets the road. This is where we turn actions and insights into things that really are felt by our workforce. So today, this session is unleashing HR's potential as architects of business transformation. This just means letting HR do what it is built to do. And the way we get there is through data and insights. Well, it's one of the ways. And I couldn't be more excited to introduce my colleague at Betterworks, who's going to lead us through this discussion, Harini Sridharan. So Harini, are you there? Are you ready to roll? Are we making this thing happen?
I am here, ready to roll. Thank you, Laurie. I'm honored and excited to be part of today. On the West Coast, it's lunchtime. So for anybody who wants a lunch or a snack, please feel free to get it to your desk and enjoy the session. I'm excited. This session comes just 2 days after our big announcement about Betterworks partnering with Visier to build a new strategic people and performance analytics capability and set of dashboards. So on a topic about how the right people insights can truly make HR the driver of business transformation, we are thrilled to have Paul Rubenstein, the Chief People Officer of Visier, to grace our panel session. Paul has spent years advising companies on HR and talent. He's passionate about helping organizations find a competitive advantage through the HR function, but doing it through science and data. Our next panelist is our very own Betterworks superstar and model leader, Andrea Lagan. She's our Chief Operating Officer, owning both customer success and employee success at Betterworks. She's had this dual role for many years now, both at Betterworks and also at past companies. So she brings this very highly data-driven nature of an operations role to her role as a HR leader, which is what makes her perfect for this topic. And we have Arnaud Grunwald, our Chief Product Officer, and the one who is passionately evangelizing and spearheading our efforts to bring strategic analytics to our customers. He was the co-founder and CEO of Hyphen, the listening and engagement platform that Betterworks acquired in 2020. Hyphen is now folded into our Engage module and has always had a strong analytics component to it. So welcome, everybody. The first part of our session, we are starting with Paul and Andrea and a panel discussion. So let's get right to it. Welcome, Andrea. Welcome, Paul. It's great to have you.
Great to be here.
It is great to be here. And I'm jealous that Lori is in 80 degrees. We had 9 inches of snow. I'm in the Boise area. We had 9 inches of snow last night at our local ski resort. I'm very ready for spring and 80 degrees and done with it, done with the winter.
Very cool. So the thing that excites me most about having you both on this session is that both of you have very non-traditional human resources background. So please tell us a little bit about how you landed in your chief people, HR leader roles at your companies. And what keeps you excited here? I know both of you have mentioned you fell into HR and fell in love with it as well. What keeps you here and how did you land the role?
Paul, you want to go first?
Oh, yeah, look at us being extra polite and nobody wanted to go first. Sure. Hey, everyone. And greetings from Shocker. It's raining here in Vancouver, BC. Someday it'll be sunshiny. I hope it is warm where you are. Yeah, I'm a first-time Chief People Officer. I spent a long time advising Chief People Officers and working on HR service delivery models, HR technology, how you actually build talent strategy. And I've always been a bit obsessed with that moment at which you see new data. Do you actually change your decision? Or do you just operate on instinct and inertia, which is how so much of business and the management of people still runs? And so, you know, I fell in love with the notion of what Visier did and how Visier specifically did it, because I know that, you know, change is inevitable. And everybody wants to unlock human performance, both as individuals, teams, organizations. And data is magical. It allows us to level the playing field. It allows us to hear what is signal and what is noise. It gives voice. It's the great equalizer. And it is an incredibly powerful tool for augmenting our intuition and challenging us and holding us accountable for all of the choices we make. So I joined Visier because I believed in that dream, and it's been an amazing place to be both a practitioner and an experimenter. We try to use data ourselves as much as we can, and I feel like in many ways I get to give back to an amazing community of both HR and people analytics people. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Data is magical.
So yes, first-time Chief People Officer, long-time advisor.
Love it. I love it. Yeah, you know, from my perspective, I guess one of the things that I've always had, my motto in my career is I have never said no to a new opportunity. Even when I was scared to death about the new opportunity. And I guess one of the things I learned early enough on was there's usually a reason that people are asking you to do something new and different. And, you know, you should absolutely take advantage of the opportunity when it's presented to you. But I had to laugh at Jen Lim during her presentation. One of the things she was talking about is, you know, everybody thinks they can be an HR person. And quite honestly, the reason I originally said yes to the opportunity wasn't because I thought everybody can be an HR person, because it was one of the great opportunities that was like very scary for me as far as, you know, how I thought about how I'm going to do in the role. But my experiences through my career have kind of grown up. I've grown up in operations, in IT, and then ultimately into customer success, before also venturing into the employee success world. But in customer success, before customer success was really a thing. And one of the things that I realized, even before being asked to take on the responsibility of HR, or what I like to think about as employee success, is when you think about the strategies that are really important for a business when they're thinking about the success of their customers, how you go about like discovering whether or not you know, the customer is a good fit for your technology, how you land that customer, how you retain them over the long term, how you grow and nurture that relationship for the long term, how they grow with you. These are all the exact same strategies that make sense when you think about the employees and that you bring to your company and the success of those employees. You know, how do you ensure that you're bringing the right person into the organization, that there's a good fit on both sides? How do you onboard that new employee so that they're integrated into, you know, your operating environment, your culture? How do you nurture and grow that employee for the long term? You know, it's like doing both of those things really, really well. It's immensely powerful in a company, and I consider myself lucky every single day that I get to be a part of how both of those things happen in our company.
Can I add something, Harini? Because you said something that really struck with me, which was non-traditional backgrounds for Andrea and I, right? We didn't grow up, through what you often see as a classic HR progression, nor did we come over from legal counsel and get appointed as head of HR, which you see a lot of those are very traditional patterns. That is becoming more the norm than the exception. Mm-hmm. As there is certainly there has been a tremendous value placed on how can somebody effectively manage risk, right? And how can somebody effectively manage the cost and efficiency of the HR function? And that has often been a path to the top leadership role in HR. But the new path is, how do we really unpack business strategy to understand what is good talent strategy, and how can a leader of talent and culture help align all of the small decisions that happen around people to a North Star. And that very much is the business. That isn't about HR, that's about business execution. So I don't know, Andrea, if you agree or not, I think I learned more about being a head of HR when I ran a P&L of a business than in much of my advising on the classic HR domain areas. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I just very recently read a HBR article that talked about how the CHRO role has the potential to have the most impact on the organization than any other position reporting to the CEO. So I can see how this might become the next most coveted role. It's exciting. I would also love to see how many of our audience members have or do not have such a traditional HR background. So I had a poll for that as well. Let's launch it. Kate, can you? I don't see the number of submissions. So when it's ready to move over to when we can see the results, just let me know.
Are we supposed to hum the Jeopardy theme in the background? I can't wait to see the results of this. It's becoming increasingly true that HR people are also leaving HR to go run an operating unit. Mm-hmm. And when you think about it, what's left in distinguishing corporate performance? Finance, man, we know how to squeeze out of finance. Tech, we've gotten a lot of cool stuff, and supply chain, heck, that's outsourced. Think about the last thing to be conquered about performance is human performance. And it isn't easy to get right. And not all companies get it right. And man, that's what everyone's trying to unlock. And it is there's two goods that come out of it, both a collective good and an individual good. And that's kind of the nice part of pursuing this type of work, is if you can unlock, what companies don't grow, a lot of individuals grow. And as a result, collectively, the company grows. And that's a beautiful thing when it works.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to have the fourth option. How many of you were in HR until recently and are considering moving to something that's that takes your HR skill sets and applies it to a different role? I think we have many. Oh, there are these results.
Great.
Look at that. More than 50% say they've held non-HR related roles in the past in their career. I'm excited to see that the transition is happening. Very cool. You just started speaking about performance, Paul. So being the CHRO or at a company that is single-mindedly focused on the topic of people analytics obviously makes your job really interesting, because you're eating your own cooking, if you will. You're using your own product internally. You have obviously some great data about your people. I'm curious to know, what types of data do you and your CEO both look at together, and what kinds of business decisions does it inform? Like, if you can give us a few examples, even that'll be amazing.
Yeah, I would say that there was a sort of a pre-COVID view and a post-COVID view, right? And a switch has happened, I think, in the way most companies look at it. I think before COVID, it was nice to be in a data-rich environment where we were able to look at fairness around performance in a very rich way. You know, the more data, the more you're able to calibrate things. I think we looked a lot at cost, right? An environment that really helped us understand, are we applying dollars in the right way relative to performance? It made simple things like pay equity and transparency, all those things that are, you know, very, you know, mechanical about it. But what switched during COVID is the classic data. And by the way, when we also look at the performance data, the pre-COVID, you were able to do classic things like understand learning. Like, did learning data actually, and the consumption of programs typically associated with employee development, impact performance? Who, why, who are the unseen performers? Who was leaving and performing? Who was staying but underperforming? Very classic things. COVID hits, and it accelerates the digital footprint that we all leave. And now the data of HR becomes the data of work. And the idea of performance becomes to enhance this notion of a rating, setting goals, and a manager saying, did you check the boxes? Did you get an A, B, C, or D on your grade? You're able to look at the productivity data in a really objective way, as well as the precursors to productivity, which is how work gets done. So when you start to take that classic set of performance data generated by the HR tech stack and layer in things like what's going on in Salesforce, what's going on in ServiceNow, what's going on in those systems of productivity, and you also layer in those data from the systems of interaction, Slack, email, Zoom, etc., you start to really understand performance ahead of the outcome. The holy grail very much is, I don't want to talk to you about your performance in a retrospective way. I want to understand the precursors to your performance and intervene. And so this has led to, who are the best salespeople and how do we know whether they're going to be successful early? What are the behaviors that cause a deal to close, and how do we look at that data early? So it's a very different conversation than it was a year and a half ago.
Yeah, we talk about this as well. Performance management has changed from looking backwards and looking at how did the team perform to how do I enable performance in the future? How do I make things go in the right direction in the future, not just look backwards? Andrea, I would love to hear your viewpoint, especially given you have, like you mentioned, this unique role where you both own the employee satisfaction metric and also the customer satisfaction metric. And it's easy to say, and I know this is much written about, happier employees lead to happier customers. But what have you seen in the organization in more specific terms? Where have you seen these connections be obvious?
Yeah. And, you know, just to add to what you said, I mean, it's more than, in my mind, it's more than the satisfaction metric. It is about the success of our employees, and it is about the success of our customers. And the reason it's easy to say that, you know, happier employees leads to happier customers is because it's true. You know, if your employees aren't happy or successful in what they're doing, ultimately, neither will your customers be. And, you know, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about strategies. What's important for the long-term success and retention of your customers is as important to the long-term success and retention of your employees, and vice versa, right? Employees want to feel connected to those things that are going to help them thrive, whether that's connections through conversations with their managers, whether it's through feedback from their leaders or their peers that helps them further develop themselves. Connection to, and very importantly, transparency around the things that are most important in the organization. Like, how do they fit into what's most important to the organization, and how do they influence that outcome? When you're connected to something that is much bigger than yourself, that is very motivating, and for employees, it inspires a willingness to go the extra mile, if you will. Finding ways to enable that through both your process and your programs and the technology you use to ensure that that's happening, and how you look at the data to support what you're doing, and make choices and quick decisions about what you're doing, that's pretty powerful.
Can I add, Andrea, as you said, like, I love what you said, and this notion of quick decisions, I think, is really important, and we shouldn't gloss over it.
Yeah, 100%.
Managers are busy, and this data is powerful as an accountability tool and a directional tool, right? There's no shame in the age of distraction to rely on data to help refocus us and remind us about what changed, what's important, keep things top of mind. And human performance and commitment to change actually improves when you have an accountability partner. But the old ways of a performance cycle, which, so many organizations have moved past just the annual performance review, I hope. Performance and coaching is a continuous conversation. The data has to be there in the flow of work. It's a motion that is part of work. It's not let's do some work and then let's, navel gaze upon the effectiveness of our work. Yeah, that's fun sometimes, but it's this constant, how'd I do? What does this mean? The mindfulness to go through not just the task or set of tasks, but a deeper connection to the outcome and the pattern that got you there.
Yeah. And as leaders, thinking strategically about how, your programs, the technology that supports that program, doing it in a way that it's organic and it's natural in the organization, and it doesn't feel forced, and allows employees to have a sense that there is a very strong connection. Everybody's rowing in the same direction. Think about one of the most frustrating things that often employees complain about. I've complained about it in my past too. Not where I am now, but you hear folks concerned or complained about, we can't break out of the silos that we're working in. We're so siloed as an organization. I have no idea what's happening over here in this function. If you aren't creating the environment, the culture and the environment, and that is done through both process and technology, to break down those silos and ensure continuous progress, continuous conversations to ensure that progress, you're just not going to move forward as an organization. You're not going to move forward as an individual or an organization.
Curiosity should be rewarded about what's going on in the organization. I always tell everyone, be a student of the firm is simply, you really have to understand, because and this has to be part of a manager's motion and a leader's motion, because a certain amount of performance is discretionary. We know that. Your ability to connect your work with the larger objectives and connect your work with the mission or purpose of the organization, that's a powerful amplifier for that discretionary effort. And we often forget, I think as leaders, we move on to the next thing so quickly, we forget that repetition is really important. You constantly have to remind people, these are the 5 objectives, this is what we're doing, over and over again. Even if it annoys you to answer that question again, because we live in an age of distraction, there are a million things competing for our attention, bing, bong, boom, whistles and whistles, very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what enables, like you talked about precursors, it's the connections that people have to other people who work alongside them. It's meaningful work, like you mentioned. It's being mission and goal oriented. It's having these 5 things in front of you all the time. But it's also one other thing, and I want to pull this thread from something that you mentioned just a while ago, Paul. It's also about all of you brought up learning and development and training. So one of the initiatives that people managers and HR leaders undertake to ensure good performance in the future is our initiatives around learning and development and training. And obviously at a 3,000-foot level, the relationship between training and job performance is obvious, right? The better skilled the employees and managers are, they deliver better performance, and employees want training as well. And that's why companies spend enormous amounts of money on employee training and education. But it's one of those things that's really hard to put a pin on when you say, did it end up getting a good return on the investment? Does it actually really lead to good organizational performance? So I have questions for both of you, but Andrea, because you are focused, obviously in your role, you're thinking about reskilling and upskilling. Like, have you seen a measurable impact on business when these programs are in place, and how would you measure it in the first place?
Yeah, it really can have a measurable impact on the performance of an organization. And, obviously it starts with thinking through what are the training opportunities and development opportunities that, are available to employees that can help advance the company's performance objectives, individual performance objectives. Everybody, there is always an opportunity. You can provide all kinds of training and education opportunities, but without some structure around how and why it matters, which oftentimes, that structure around why the training is important and how it can be consumed in a way that, allows for the progress of both the employee development and the company's progress. That's where I think organizations have a potential to fail. It's not putting that structure in place around the training that's made available to employees. There's a lot of investment that goes into putting it out there. Consumption might be kind of low. If you're not putting that, likely will be pretty low. Many of, I would say our most successful customers, and, in the awards session, I'm actually going to share a little bit about one of the companies that does this really well, but, they make development and kind of the measurable impact of development a key component of their program. And this can be done in a variety of ways, whether it's using, something like feedback to, suss out development areas that both the manager and the employee can align on, and, put in place a plan for further development for that employee. That development might also further the growth of the company. When all of these aspects, that structure along with the learning and development opportunity is part of a program, most organizations are seeing a much higher level of engagement and performance from their employees. And then when you have, some strong analytics in place where you can consolidate both the activities, the structure, and the visibility of what learning has been made available, how has that progressed through conversations, through goal progress, et cetera? Where do you have, areas in the business where, maybe some folks aren't doing this as well as other folks in leadership roles. You can focus on that very quickly and adjust so that you are getting full return on the investment in the L&D space and making sure that the employees and the business is moving forward.
Yes, +1. There is not a learning and development person out there who doesn't get frustrated sometimes about the money they spent on a course that nobody came to, right? Yeah. Oh my God, that's the worst, especially when it was so carefully tuned to the capabilities that are in the success profile that was written at some point for that job. It's a terrible feeling. Why should I have to beg these people to go to school to do their homework? You know how you do it? You put a leaderboard up. These are, you pick it. I don't know if it's customer success people, who has the best retention scores or upsell scores in their customer base, which are the most successful salespeople, and then trace it back and show everyone these people took the courses, these people didn't, right? The people who are most successful spent time studying and preparing. And then did the managers actually show the demonstrated, did they actually show and do that? Did it show up in the GOM call or all the other data that's available? Remember, we live in a data-rich environment where it's easy to say, these are the behaviors that we're going to expect. These are the behaviors we're going to show you what good looks like, learning. These are the behaviors we're going to observe, and this is the outcome we expect. Building that chain with clarity and specificity through the data is some real good stuff. Flip side, though, is you may turn out that some of the courses actually aren't right. There's no shame in that. Go back, tune them, learn. And that's a healthy cycle around it. On a longer basis, show people not a mythical career path, but show them, hey, here's the leader that you really want. You want that job? Here's all the jobs that somebody had, and here's the learning and time they spent. Here are the things they got good at. And here's how they performed over time, because we know that performance goes up and down over time. And normalizing, I have to say, in this day and age, normalizing the fact that your first year in a job, even though you got like this amazing performance rating the year before, your first year in a job, you might just meet, or you might be below meets as you learn. And it's not a judgment, it's a temporary state, is the other part that really influences learning. To actually say, you're right, it's okay to be in a state of learning and improvement, really powerful.
And Paul, how do you take all of this data? What do you show your CEO when you take all of this data of what has worked and what's not worked, and go to your CEO and ask for more learning and development budget? Like how?
So, I'll be honest, I'm not really good with the learning data yet. That's my missing part. I have network analysis data. And I'm just about to have yet another LMS come online. And so I am 4 months away from adding the learning data to the rest of this.
Very cool. We'll circle back with you in a few months.
Some of our customers do a way better job with the learning data, but our environment is rich in everything but learning, but we're going to get there.
We'll move on to the final topic of the first part of our panel session, which is fairness, equality, and inclusion in employee experience and development and performance management. I think John brought this up earlier when he opened the session. Our recently released performance enablement research report revealed that 55% of employees ranked fairness as the most important aspect of the employee experience, like more than growth, more than we just talked about learning and learning development, more than growth, more than flexibility, more than even a strong leadership team. Unfortunately, that same report also showed that 2/3 of those employees felt like their performance reviews are biased. Understandable, because it's such a human process and it's just prone to normal human biases. Andrea, as a HR leader, you obviously deeply care about this topic of ensuring fairness in the process. And where do you see these issues creep up, and how do you track them, and what do you keep an eye out for?
Yeah, Well, it has to start with the day-to-day. I mean, you cannot ensure fairness in an organization if you're only focused on performance like once every 6 months or yearly. And, Humera in the Intuit session earlier said this as well. Everything happens so fast, and you just cannot do things once or twice a year anymore. And so, when you're thinking about equity and, everything DEIB in an organization, you really have to be thoughtful about, does your process ensure that all of your managers, all of your leaders in an organization, do they have the same process? Do they have the same tools for connecting with their employees? How frequently are they having conversations or check-ins or one-on-ones? How often are those happening? The frequency of feedback, how is that provided? Is it provided in a structured and a consistent way? Is there a common approach to how goals are assessed and progressed and discussed? Are there mechanisms in place to ensure that people know how to deliver feedback in a good way? And just the approach needs to be regular. It needs to be, Paul, you said it earlier, in the flow of work, like every day in the flow of work. And that allows for you to have a great level of objectivity in all of the things that I just talked about. When you think about how you want to calibrate your organization and the team members across your organization, you can do that in a data-based way, objectively. You, with the right analytics like Visier provides, have very quick visibility to where there are inequities in the process or within certain areas of the business that you can quickly address before it's too late.
So DEIB is such a big topic at Visier, right? I'd love to hear from you, Paul.
So Andrea, you mentioned building capabilities around processes that are meant to drive both performance, growth, and outcomes. Making them in the flow of work. So the process. So there's the capability. There's the process. There's the mirror. Holding a mirror up to the collective sum of our choices and to understand where your next choice about who gets program nominated for a development program, who gets hired, promoted, et cetera, to make sure that it reflects both the overall goals for diversity and inclusion across the organization, as well as what is just and fair. I think that mirror is really important. I think the other dimension that I would add to that is this then becomes a cultural thing, right? Making sure that this is part of your culture to look in the mirror, to be good at a certain thing, to follow the process, right? I think that is a really, that's the powerful thing that hooks it all together. And when you string it together and set a goal around a collective outcome and connect everybody's small choices to it, that's like anything in corporate performance, that's when change happens. You want to change the female representation in your organization, which is what we set out to do. We went from like 27% to 38% in the course of 2 years. It was not because I did anything miraculous at all, other than say, this is important, repeat the data, spread the data around, and build awareness around it. We got more to go. We're not done. But, it's, what is it? Statements and pledges are nice, but data lights the path to accountability and change. And that doesn't just go for diversity, that goes for corporate performance, that goes for anything.
Yeah, sharing the data as important as just having the metrics in front of you. I have one question that came in from Roma. Isn't the quality more important than the quantity? So quality of conversations or feedback versus quantity. Andrea,
I would say, yes, the quality is absolutely critical. You want to have meaningful conversations, meaningful for both the employee and for the manager. I wouldn't say it's exclusive of quantity. You do want frequency in the process. And again, kind of going back to the, how do you build this into your kind of day-to-day operating model and make it a part of just standard operating procedure in the flow of work? There is that element of quantity so that it is regular, not something that is, once or twice a year where you have to like spend so much time preparing and then it's, crazy as far as, how much investment and time you have to give it. But the quality is key. And, what you might have heard in the prior customer panel, the thoughtfulness of the structure of the conversation so that it's different on a regular basis. And there are different things that you're talking about. Jeff talked about that at the University of Phoenix and how, they try to keep the conversations fresh in their organization. That's important too.
If you want a transactional relationship with your employee, then, sure, maybe you don't need a ongoing conversation. Maybe it is just, oh, I only do it once a year and it's a really good conversation. Maybe that's enough for the right person. That's your brand now, right? If your brand conversation does not imply relationship, does not imply connection, it takes many conversations to have a good dialogue, a rapport, a connection. And as a leader, that's what you're really trying to build with people. So I reject the premise of the question, should it be quantity or quality? It should be both and tuned to the right person.
Very cool. Agreed. Thank you so much, Andrea and Paul, for a very, very lively part of the session. We're going to switch context a little bit here because we wanted to look at all of this from a technology standpoint. What does it mean to have all of these measures and metrics and best practices that you just heard at your fingertips? What does it take from a technology standpoint? Thank you again, Paul and Andrea, and both of them will come back towards the end of the session for the Q&A portion. But now I'd like to invite Arnaud to speak to the technology portion of our session. Welcome, Arnaud. Very, very pleased to have you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here too. Super
Very
excited.
Cool. Very cool. Yes, I'm as well. So enterprises today obviously already have some form of people analytics software, right? But compared to these traditional people analytics tools, what would you say is the next generation of people analytics technology set to do? What different things should it solve for?
Yeah, well, by way of introduction, I graduated from college with a master's in applied math in 2003, 20 years ago. I'm dating myself. But analytics back then used to be for experts, for geeks, right? Think about Jonah Hill in Moneyball, right? So I think we've come a long way. There's been a big evolution of analytics in general. I practiced analytics in another industry, pharmaceuticals, before I came to HR. But now that I'm in HR, I see also the evolution in people analytics. It's amazing, especially to be able to put real-time data at everyone's fingertips so that they can make the smart decisions and smart decisions at every level of the organization. Not only the big strategic decisions that the C-suite cares about, but also the smaller, more daily manager level decisions. So to relate with what Paul and Andrea talked about, I think the main evolution between a traditional way of doing analytics and a more modern way of analytics it's two ways. There's the shift from reporting-focused insights to outcome-based focused insights, and Paul talked about that. And then there's the shift to providing these analytics to more people. You just talked about it, right? This awareness, this alignment, this transparency, and curling everybody behind a data-driven culture. These are two shifts that we see in the market. So I was intending to, actually I'm super excited to show to this audience in exclusivity the first looks of our embedded integration with Visier, one of the leading people analytics software solution out there. And so I'm going to share my screen. And what's the first thing that's important with regards to what we heard in the first part of this discussion is that it's embedded, right? Analytics is no longer a place that you go to. It's a place that is in your flow of work, right? But with that, we talked about DEIB, for instance, right? It's critical to be able to slice and dice simple DEIB demographic data to answer basic questions and identify opportunities. You know, what people have always been done in analytics. For instance, I can look at women ratio in the workplace. So I'm going to focus on women and cross out men and non-binary. And I hear that there's discrepancies across regions in my organization. So I'm going to pull up location. That's interesting. And actually what I'm most interested about is the manager, the ratio of managers who are women. So I can just pull up managers. Having this data at your fingertips and being able to answer very simple questions is critical. And then of course you want different visualizations to be able to paste things into PowerPoint or to share, as we'll see later on. And you know, the current technologies are amazing in that I can just build a quick comparison with last year and see that, you know, South America is doing well in terms of bringing more females in manager roles, as opposed to North America, APAC, that is more on the flat side, and EMEA on the decreasing side. So something that we need to look into in terms of best practices. So yes, there are some decisions that you can make from this data. You slice and dice, but when it comes to DEIB, for instance, to continue on this thread, it's not only about the sheer number of employees or new hires, right? That's a simple, basic metric, but is our performance management fair? Is there unconscious bias in how we manage employees? In going even further, how is our performance management practice impacting the business, right? This is really important. So answering these types of questions require merging different data sets and cross-correlating data to test, to identify hypotheses, to test hypotheses, and possibly understand root cause of issues, and that allow you to make decisions. So going back to my home screen, there's one analysis that I wanted to show you. What is the percentage of employees with development goals, right? This is something that Andrea was talking about. Having this data set at your fingertips, you can, you know, add different departments there, and really understanding what can I do, right? What can I do? So sales seems to be trending lower. So let's look at sales. And I'm going to see, I'm an HR business partner, by the way, and I want to see if I can identify the managers in the hierarchy that I can talk to really understand if there is some discrepancy. So here I can see them. Sorry, they didn't show up, but I can see that now. I can see the discrepancies between managers in this sales team, and understanding who are people who do a great job pushing their employees to have developmental goals, and who are people who need to learn from the best, and really enabling me to have the right conversations with them. But more than that, I can go further out in the report and see what is the relationship between developmental goal progress and performance. So not only should people adopt developmental goals, but also they should make progress, and hopefully it has an impact on on their performance. So that's something that you can look at. The data is not definitive, right? And there are some counterexamples. And this is very much demo data with randomized values. But you can see that there are teams like IT, like marketing, that show that the more development, the more you progress on developmental goals, the more performance you achieve. And there's more data that we bring here. For instance, we'll be bringing retention data, of course, right? Everybody cares about retention. You want to understand the root cause of attrition. And for that, you need to bring together employee engagement survey data, employee behavior data, employee environment data, and the outcome, whether people stayed or left. So it's just fascinating, the amount of data that can come together to answer powerful questions.
Yeah, the amount of, like you mentioned, typically data exists in silos. So it's really great to see you have data from performance ratings data. You mentioned retention data. You showed DEIB data, demographic data, of course, because you can, with DEIB or performance trends, you can see how different departments are doing. Possibly also engagement survey data as well. So the cross correlation of data is amazing, and the fact that you can bring together all of these different data points is amazing. But it also makes it harder in the sense that now that I have all of this data, I can cross correlate anything with anything. Like how do I know what questions I can ask? Like what can HR?
Oh yeah, I'm not sure you saw when I shared. I'm going to share again. I didn't make it a point, but one of the reasons why we partnered with Visier is that I think there's more data available to more people, and people who are not data experts or analytics experts. So for these, I think there's a real, I would call it a blank page anxiety, right? Where do I start? It's hard to understand the realm of the possibles. They would love for someone to, they used to have consultants helping them understand, what are the insights. So what are the questions that I can ask that data? So what I love in how we present the data with Visier is, and I can select a better question-based approach, is that we do some hand-holding, right? The more people you have accessing the data, the more hand-holding you need to do, because these are not data experts, and you need to show them what's possible and speak their language, right? These are simple business questions that everybody can relate to, and then can click on and see, oh, okay, this is how I measure performance progress over time. This is how I can click through, and then I can make this data my own. I think there's another aspect that I wanted to point out, is that if you really want to build a culture of data-driven decisions, you want to have what I would call social aspect of analytics, right? The analytics used to live in Excel files and PowerPoint decks, and as you can guess from my first jobs, I have lived through this. But business is about collaboration and exchange and communication. So having social features such as sharing, right? Or being able to capture an analysis, being able to save an analysis, being able to make it my own, but then being able to share it with, there's no John, I guess. Is there Kelly? With Kelly in the organization, adding some context, adding a note, and that participates in just creating that culture of analytics, making more people come to analytics, understand in a data-driven way the business, and that creates a virtuous cycle. The more people come to your dashboards and analytics, the more people understand them, the more people are aligned behind a culture of data-driven decisions.
I love that. Paul mentioned this as well. It's not just about the analytics itself. It's also about the entire life cycle of those metrics. Like, how does it get shared? Who does it get shared with? What actions people take with it? I can see how technology needs to think about all of those aspects as well, not just what metrics gets presented.
Exactly. Exactly.
I know we only have a couple of minutes to go before Laurie comes in and takes us to the next session, but any big last takeaways as folks are evaluating what they should consider from a people analytics software standpoint?
Arnaud,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Since we've gone through a software evaluation ourselves, of course, you need something that meets the basic needs, right? That scales to large organizations. If you are a large organization that has the right analytic features that fits within your price range. But to me, the most important, maybe three things are, the world is moving fast. You have more data sets. You have more different business questions, different economic environments, so on and so forth. So you need something that's extensible, that's flexible, that is easy to innovate and evolve and make it your own over time, right? So that evolution is important. You need to be able to drive insane adoption. So it needs to look great, to be honest, right? The UX, the ease to access, the intuitiveness of the platform when non-analytics people come in, that's super important, and the social features that I just talked about. And then you need to, it's less obvious than what I just said, just give the analytics to more people. You want to be able to provide this wide access, but there are some caveats to this, right? Because some people shouldn't see some data sets, right? Or some data fields. So you need to have a permission-based model, so on and so forth. So something that evolves easily, something that drives insane adoption, and that allows for a broad access, but with the caveats that I just mentioned.
Can I give a shout out to you and the Betterworks team, Arnaud, because what I think is really happening here is you're going from like, hey, let's go help manage performance and be a system of record, and you're answering the question not what was performance, but so what? How does this connect to all the other investments of HR and all the other outcomes that are about business performance? And just a reminder to everyone, the analytics you're offering isn't to answer questions, it's to help people ask better questions. And the format you're talking about, appreciative inquiry, that's how we understand what the real root cause of what's limiting our individual and collective outcomes really comes to play. So I love where you're going with this.
We're excited too.
Yeah, cannot wait for our customers to get this. Laurie, back to you. We cannot hear you, at least I cannot. I think you might be on mute.
How about now? Can you hear me
now? Yes.
I wasn't plugged in. Isn't that nice? I was charging up my battery pack. So panel, we've been asking everybody for book recommendations. We don't have enough time to go around, but we're going to collect your book recommendations and turn them into a blog post collectively for EmpowerHR. So make sure you start thinking about what books you would recommend related to the panel to help people really think about how to be the architects of business transformation. And for everybody else, we're ending this session, but we've got 2 more sessions to go. First, our colleague Andrea is going to do some amazing storytelling and talk about real-world applications of everything we've talked about today in our next customer panel, which is coming up next. And then after that, John Schneider and I will be back to wrap up the day with key talking points and those HRCI and SHRM recertification credits. So everybody stand by. You're going to exit out of here, but you're going to join the next session, which will begin momentarily. Thank you so much.